Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nakiesha Koss. I'm a product marketing manager working on Premiere Pro, Community, and all kinds of fun stuff at Adobe. This is an Adobe Video Community Meet-up. We do these monthly, the last Wednesday of every month, and we generally have a great live audience, and it's really great to see some of our friends and colleagues there in the chat pod already. Hello, everybody. And then it's offered on demand as well. And you can expect to find in the description timestamps. We have a pretty clear format here. So we try to keep to it, keep it moving along so that you can enjoy this, whether you're able to join us live or are catching it afterwards. So what you can expect to see in any of these meetups is a product demo, section for Meet the Teams, where we invite some of the Adobe folks to join us for a conversation, and a community spotlight. And then we always wrap it up with some Q&A. So please do add your questions to the chat pod, and we will get to them either mid, but probably at the end of the session. Today's topic is UX IRL. What is that? Like user experience in real life. There is a whole discipline around user experience and designing for user experience. And then there is delivering products and how people react and how changes affect your workflows. So we want to talk about that journey and what are some of the important steps up along that. What are some of the important pieces like testing and feedback from users, and ultimately the vision for products like Premiere Pro. We're going to be joined by some of my favorite colleagues today. We've got folks from the design side and the product management side for Premiere Pro, and we're going to shine a spotlight on real life workflows at the end, and then, like I said, Q&A. But first, let's do that product demo. We're going to see a video here that you may have seen going around. It features creators Javier Mercedes and Lila, who are showing off some of the latest updates that we have made to Premiere Pro, namely the new import and export workflows, as well as the updated header bar. So have a look at this overview from them, and then we'll invite some of our team to join us for a conversation on the other side of it.
Adobe has reimagined the editing workflow. A new way to import and export your video. This is where you begin crafting your stories. Review the files on your SD cards, copy them into your Premiere Pro project, and bring them onto the timeline as a sequence. A new header bar makes it easy to navigate, so there's more room for creativity. When your video is ready, open the new export mode. Choose where you want your video to go, and Premiere Pro can even post your videos to social media for you. Use the default export settings or save your own presets. There's more coming. Watch for new import and export features in future updates. Experience a new way of building stories and sharing them with the world. Available now in Premiere Pro.
All right, welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and then I'm really excited to be joined here by Francis and Parker. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. Tell me who you are and what it is that you do.
Cool. Hey, thanks, Nakiesha. Why don't I go first? Hey, everyone. I'm Francis Crossman. I'm the Senior Product Manager of Premiere Pro. I've been at Adobe for about 5 years now. And before that, I was an editor and colorist working professionally in the industry. And that was for about 10 years in San Francisco. So absolutely no stranger to many hours in a dark room, working under deadlines, producer breathing down my neck, and having to get that show out on time again and again and again. Happy to be here.
Cool. And hi, my name is Parker. I'm a technologist and filmmaker and designer. And I went from working in an agency environment and attending film school to joining Adobe as a design intern in 2017. And now I'm a senior experience designer for Premiere Pro. In the last few years, I've worked on some of our AI features like auto reframe and scene edit detection, speech to text, as well as some workflow and interface updates like freeform media view, import export mode, and the very glamorous task of updating the fonts across our interface from the operating system fonts to an Adobe font. So busy couple of years, and I'm also excited to be here with Francis and Nakiesha.
That's awesome. You touched on this a little bit, Parker, but maybe you can expand and we can hear from Francis as well. Life before Adobe, what were you doing before you became part of the product Premiere Pro?
I've been doing just a lot of it, a lot of filmmaking personally, like since I was a little kid. Always grew up with a camera in my hands, and then I did a lot of freelance work in high school, wedding videography stuff, and also ended up working at an agency in college that was producing ads and branded content, as well as a couple of documentaries. So I've run the gamut from social media content creation to ad content to long-form documentary work. But now that I'm here, mostly making little TikToks on my own on the side.
Awesome. What about you, Francis?
Yeah, I would say my background is, I don't know, probably Parker and I have a lot in common. You know, we both grew up probably as film nerds, loving movies, you know, going to movies all the time and watching them all the time. As soon as we could get our hands on a camera, you know, running around and shooting stuff. But I went to film school, and there I focused on cinematography and lighting. While all my friends thought that they were going to be directors and, you know, the next Scorsese or next Tarantino or whatever, I thought I actually really am fascinated by the way cameras and lenses work and how light interacts with all of that. And so I ended up shooting a lot of my friends' films. So while they went into, you know, debt to finance their student projects, I gained all the experience from, you know, shooting and lighting their films. And, you know, I really thought I wanted to be an on-set person. I wanted to, you know, be the cinematographer or the gaffer or the lighting electrician, you know, on set in all the glitz and glamour. And I wanted to do that because I didn't want to sit behind a desk all day, which is funny because here I am sitting behind a desk all day. But what led me from that love of camera work to where I am now was, you know, as part of my film school, I started needing to edit stuff, just, you know, to complete my projects. You know, even if I shot it, I had to kind of put together the piece. And I really fell in love with editing. I actually edited like 16 millimeter and 8 millimeter film, and then of course digital. And it was that love of editing pretty early on in my film school career that made me kind of change focus and really focus on editing. And then I, you know, much the same as Parker, I did, you know, freelance stuff for a while, and then ended up becoming the senior video editor at the San Francisco Opera, where I was in charge of putting together all of their long form cinematic releases of operas, which is a very specific thing. You know, I'm more of a rock and roll guy, to be perfectly honest, but I learned a lot about, you know, Puccini and Rossetti and all the Italian bel canto repertoire. And that was a really, really fascinating job. We had 13 cameras. And so I was doing, you know, 13 multi-camera editing, which is a lot to keep track of. And then getting those out on, you know, public television, Blu-ray, DVD, streaming, really everything. And then now I am here at Adobe, and yeah.
I love it.
Premiere.
And I would just say, you know, observationally, that you two are not unique in that, coming from a background in the industry. And I would say probably the majority of our colleagues have some experience, if not a whole lot of it. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Yeah,
think
for
it's
sure.
Actually, like
one
kind
of
of
the
weird.
most,
I feel like you end up like approaching a lot of people here, just thinking of them as like another techie office mate, and then they suddenly talk about like some award that they've won or some project that they worked on in the past that you actually really, really love. So it's great having people that have both an understanding of like the workflows and the software, and have a background in what we all love and are here to help make.
yeah. How would you say that your previous work experiences, like, how does that impact your job now, or does it?
Oh, it absolutely does for me. I mean, as a product manager, I think that my number one job is to serve the customer and make sure that we're building the right product for the customer. And it wasn't that long ago that I was a customer myself. So I have that customer empathy just ingrained in me. When somebody has a problem that they need to solve, I'm like, yes, I get it. I've been there. I can relate. And when we make changes and it makes a person's life better, it's so wonderful to see that.
It's certainly
Agreed.
like a delicate balance, though, because although it's really helpful for us to have that background where we understand the complexities that go into video production, it's also a landscape that changes so fast. And in a matter of years of working here, like the entire landscape, the formats people are using, the way they're delivering things, the way they get work done changes really quickly. And so I think it's important not only to have that background, but to try to keep up with doing film and video projects whenever we can, but also to have
Mm-hmm.
really close relationships to creators all across the industry so that they can keep us in the loop about what things need to be happening today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great segue into what we want to talk about today is like, what is the journey of bringing features, updating the user experience, updating anything that goes into Premiere Pro as a product. I want to talk a bit about how does that start? What's the journey from where it starts? What goes into, the ideas, and then touch on, what it mean to get them out there, have real people using them in real life. And then beyond that. But let's start at the beginning. And I think the video that we just showed, the demo, is a great example. There are quite a few recent, pretty major updates to the way that Premiere Pro looks, and the way one kind of utilizes some of the core workflows there. So especially concerning import and export. So change is hard. We know that. Why did we make those updates? For whom? Why now? Francis, can we start with you on that one?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like I said about my job is to serve the customers. Any update always starts with listening to customers and figuring out what they need. And in the case of the new import and export mode, the customers that we were really trying to target first thing was newer users who are having a hard time getting started. And some of the things that we heard pretty consistently were, I'm not quite sure how to start a project. I'm not quite sure how to import my media. And then on the back end, I'm not quite sure what the right settings are to choose to get that project exported. And so those were the main goals that we were trying to solve with the new import and export modes. Of course, at the same time, we have to recognize that there's a very established customer base of people who use our product day in and day out professionally, and we have to be sympathetic to that. So we can't ever just focus on one specific user segment. And so with import and export mode, we really did look at it from a pro lens as well, and look at what are the things that we can add in here that are going to be workflow accelerators that are going to help you get your job done quicker as a pro, but also in a way that's easier to use for those newer users to get started. So this is a very difficult tightrope to walk. And this is also just the beginning for import and export mode. We have a lot more work to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that there is a lot that goes. So there's a big idea. Hey, can we make this easier for people who are just getting started, or don't have the film school background necessarily. Can we make that better for our current and seasoned users? Those are big ideas, and those go to the experience design team, and you, Parker, and the rest of the folks on that team start to come up with some concepts of how that can work. Can we talk about like the conception of what that might look like?
Totally. Yeah, so it already takes a long time to figure out the right thing to do. And luckily, we've got amazing people like Francis to do that. And then there's a task of how do we actually do it? And so that falls to the experience design team, which is sort of Adobe's all encapsulating term for product designer, research, UX, UI design, all of that stuff. And there's a lot of processes involved. In the case of something like import and export mode, we've been looking at about 2 years of development, and then who knows how long that we were thinking about it beforehand. So there's a lot to talk about, but I would kind of just like highlight two things or three things in like the beginning, the middle, and the end. Usually once we get those requirements and we're kicking off a project, we start by trying to understand the root problem or the core workflow that we're trying to accomplish, rather than just like saying like, here's the requirement, let's put in a new button for it. I guess a lot of people call this like first principles thinking, but it's really easy to get requests and requirements thrown at you and just try to address them in the easiest way possible. And that makes the entire application a lot more difficult to use. So I think a great example of this would be speech to text, auto speech to text using, or auto captioning using speech to text, where we knew we had this really awesome ability to translate dialogue and turn it into captions. And we could have just said like, all right, we're going to do that with a button and then use the old captioning system. But when we thought about the bigger picture, we realized that like, it's still not ideal to use that old system. And we didn't want to sort of combine this awesome new way of working with something that we wanted to improve anyways. So we had to go back to the drawing board for speech to text and think about what an entire captioning workflow could look like. So that would be like the beginning of the process, that first principles thinking. In the middle, there's really just like a whole lot of iteration. So there's, mapping out the ideal workflow in more abstract terms, just like how do I want to get from point A to point Z? And from there, we'll iterate on a bunch of different ways that we could accomplish that within the interface using different surfaces, different types of interaction patterns, and kind of whittle those down as a team and speaking with users until we can refine it to the ideal experience. And once we've been able to design that and sort of develop what we think we want to do, the tail end of that is testing it. And when we're testing it, we're always trying to balance out these sort of quantitative and qualitative metrics. So like the quantitative side would be like we mentioned with import and export mode. We knew specifically that like X number of new users were having a hard time completing these core tasks, and we wanted to move it by, Y percentage. And so we try to hit those quantitative metrics, but there's also this very qualitative side to video editing, which is that it's very instinctual and flow-based and, ingrained into your muscle memory. And so it takes a lot of time talking with people that use the application every day and trying to get them to test out these workflows long-term to refine it into a more streamlined thing that you can't really measure with numbers, you can only feel. And so we spend a lot of time going back and forth with industry professionals on that qualitative side. So that's like a brief look into experience design.
I love it. I know that, yeah, so some of the main things, like at the beginning, there's a ton of user research that happens. We get something together, and I know there's like a lot of time that's spent in beta, and between user research and beta, there's quite a bit of information that we get. So can we talk about I really appreciate the context of the speech to text example for this import and export mode. What were some of the things that we learned from, especially if there was anything that was kind of surprising from the user research and beta, Premiere Pro beta time that we were checking in with our customers? Francis, do you have something on that?
Yeah, totally. I can take that. So these workflows were actually in public beta for a long time. I want to say it was like 8 or 9 months, maybe even close to a year. And during that whole time, we were getting feedback from people. And even now, there still are some very long and lively and in-depth threads on import, export, also the header bar. And people gave us really good feedback. In some cases, they validated our thinking. In other cases, they really challenged our thinking and we had to adapt. I think a really good example of a benefit of public beta. Oh, and also, actually, maybe before I jump into this, let's just make sure everyone knows what the beta is. So, public beta is an open program that anyone can get into. It installs alongside Premiere Pro. It doesn't interfere with your shipping version. Project files are compatible back and forth. And so it really gives you a chance to test out everything that we're working on. And in fact, we update it daily. So these are like the nightly dev builds that we internally are testing that you can test as well. And you can get information on what we're working on. There's a little beaker icon up in the top right corner that shows you, the new things that we're working on. And in a lot of cases, there are links to forum threads on those issues. So if you have feedback, you can go and it's an open thread where anyone can give feedback. So for the header bar specifically, on that thread, on the beta forum, we got a lot of feedback that, if you remember, it used to be all of the workspaces across the top of the header bar, and then we squished them all into a little drop-down icon. And the feedback that we got was, it now takes me more clicks to change workspaces, and I can't see what workspace I'm currently in. And if I want to switch between multiple different workspaces quickly, it's now very difficult to do that. And so what we did was we actually, Parker and I got together and we're like, God, these guys are right. Let's figure out a solution. And so we really quickly sketched up a design for the ability to show your current workspace and a little expandable area to drag out and show the different workspaces that you had. And that was our solution to addressing their main concerns of fewer clicks, show me what workspace I'm in. And we actually went and posted those mock-ups on the beta forum and said, would this be a solution? And those folks actually validated our thinking. And then we implemented it. And, a few weeks later, the change was actually in beta, and those folks who gave us feedback were able to see that we addressed it. And they said, yeah, this is so much better. Thank you. So that, I think, is a very good example of a success story of how the product was made better by the interactions that we had with beta customers.
And I think that example that you pulled out is also one of my favorite examples of sort of finding compromise between our future vision and the needs of now. Because it's worth calling out that all of these parts of the experience we're talking about, import mode, the header bar, and export mode, they were built to be sort of modular and extensible so that they could improve in the future. Like if you think about importing footage, there's a lot of things you might want to do to footage in the future. You might want to run AI processes on it, normalization of color or audio. And now we have a space to do that. And in the header bar, we have all these things we're working on for sort of like high level global functions to put in there. But we were so focused on a lot of those future functions that we didn't realize that it was not ideal for users right now who were kind of like only seeing the workspace bar. So we were able to figure out like how to make that area more usable to them while remaining aligned with the vision of how it can grow in the future. And that sort of conversation with the community has just been super awesome.
What, speaking of like, what is the vision? And I know that we're not there yet. I know that we haven't, fully, the vision isn't fully realized yet in what you're seeing in Premiere Pro. Let's talk a little bit about the process of incrementality, delivering change, knowing that change is hard, knowing that people want change as long as nothing changes. And I count myself in that group as well. Can we talk a little bit about like what's the process for figuring out what that is and assuring, this promise for the future where we have, what lays beyond?
Yeah, totally. I mean, import, as Parker kind of said, import mode and export mode both give us, well, and the header bar as well, give us this surface that we can now expand on. So in import mode, some of the things that we've got in the works that you'll see coming, in the future are like the ability to create proxies on import, or to maybe automatically apply a LUT to log footage, or automatically do background transcription of voice, of like speech, that so that you can do like a text-based editing type workflow. These are all things that we are thinking about and that we have in the works. And this surface actually is an enabler for those kinds of workflows. And then on the export side as well, you can imagine all sorts of powerful things that we could do there. Like, hey, we should have a default destination for Frame.io, which would have even more functionality than the built-in, Frame.io panel. So again, these surfaces just open up a whole bunch of opportunities for us to bring power and efficiency to the app.
I think that incremental change is also like a game of give and take that we're kind of playing with a lot. For instance, like one of our principles is that if we're going to make these big workflow changes, we need to provide that people are familiar with, because like I mentioned, video editors are dealing with these complex tasks for long hours that are really ingrained in their muscle memory. And so even if a change is a good change, it can be really jarring to experience at first. And so with import and export mode, the way we try to retain familiarity is that, if you don't want to use import mode, you can create a project bypassing that entire screen. Just put in the name and location, click create, and you get dropped into a blank editing interface. With export mode, if you prefer the older layout of the export options from before, Media Encoder still offers that layout. So we're trying to move towards these newer experiences while offering alternative paths to do the things people are used to. And when we are ready to commit to larger changes, those changes will be accompanied by significant feature additions or improvements that will make you a lot more excited to use those new experiences.
And I just want to speak to that. Thank you so much, Parker. To the importance we have been talking about, the importance of feedback, both at the beta level and then once features are out there in the wild and people are bumping up against, change. And some of that may just be, kind of muscle. There's a lot of muscle memory that goes into video editing. So any adjustment to that can take some time. But other things might be things that we just hadn't bumped into even with all of the testing before. So can we talk about what are the best paths for getting your feedback to us at any part in that journey? What are the modalities for communication with you?
Yeah, well, I think that the very first thing is if you're running into a bug or, something where you're not quite sure how it works, Adobe customer care is always there for you. So you can tweet at them, you can, chat with them on the help website. If you have feedback, you can do that on user voice. So that's where, you can say, hey, I think it really should work like this. Or I have an idea for something that you guys should implement in the app that would really benefit my workflow. And the easiest way to get to that is from within Premiere, the help menu, go down to provide feedback, and that'll take you directly to user voice. And it's really helpful to, search around and see if other people have the same ideas as you. Chances are you're not an original snowflake and somebody else had that same idea first. And so you can add some comments and upvote their idea. And that really is a very strong signal to us. We're on user voice all the time. Me, myself, I'm reviewing stuff on user voice and getting a sense of what people's frustrations are, and we're reacting to it. So as you can imagine, there was quite a lot of traffic on user voice and other forms as well after we released the new, import and export modes. And one, probably the most, like the hottest topic on there was a very specific thing in export mode where you want to go and click on the file location and then click on a previously exported file in order to copy that file name and then use that as a basis for your next export. Really kind of a basic thing. And the honest truth is we overlooked it. It was our bad. Like, there's no way to sugarcoat that other than we just didn't do the right thing. We were called out on it, and we made that our top priority to fix, and we fixed it. So in the latest release, it's been fixed. And you can see on user voice that that's been addressed. So for those of you who feel like user voice is kind of like shouting into a void, it really isn't. We are listening. And we are also people, so be kind to us.
Well, I think not just be kind. I think that is something we hope, that there's decency. But we do, this happens on the internet everywhere too. But I think people get heated, and this is like affects people personally because they spend so much time in our applications doing their job and doing their passion, that sometimes screaming into the void, we forget that there's humans on the other side of that. And we'll say something's got, there were some, I think both of you were impacted by some pretty personal stuff. So just, call for
Civility.
kindness. Civility. Yeah, totally.
You know what?
But we understand too.
I do. I have a thick skin, and I can see through the venom and see what is the underlying problem that this person is really having. Is it really just that they hate change, or are they having like a legitimate issue? And there are some legitimate issues on there, and we're definitely addressing those.
Civility. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like we said, we both worked in the film industry, so we understand being under a tight deadline to deliver these things and having frustration with the tools. So there's legitimacy to the frustration, but we are people, and we are reading your comments every single day, chatting about them on Slack. Even if we can't immediately respond to you with a solution, the team is talking about how to best solve your problems all day.
And actually, Ben just brought something up on the Facebook Live that we also have a number of employees who are really active in Facebook groups and Reddits and et cetera. So there's people outside of our own channels that are also participating in conversations that are happening. So if you see us there, say hi. We do have a really active team, and we hope that we are finding your conversations about the products and not only just passively receiving feedback on our own channels.
And they're doing that in their own time. They're doing that just
are.
Because they love talking to people about the product.
And often because they were in those spaces before because of their industry experience. So it all kind of comes full circle. I do want to talk a little bit about the future and what people can expect. We touched on this a little bit, the vision for even just the refresh to the UX, et cetera, is going to, there's even more to come. So any hints that you can drop or anything like that?
Hints that we can drop. I would pay attention to the right-hand side of import mode because we're going to be adding some more power in there. I kind of hinted at it earlier, some ideas around like creating proxies or doing automatic transcription. Think about that kind of stuff. You'll start to see some cool stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah. I think that like our last couple of releases show you very clearly what we're thinking about in the future if you pay attention to them. Like you'll notice 3 themes are kind of like continuing to work on our quality and performance, trying to sort of streamline things that you can get done with like a click or a preset while still allowing you to dive deep into all of like the functionality that goes into that. And then like really looking at ways that artificial intelligence and machine learning can help aid you in like automating the mundane parts of the job. So I won't say anything specific about those 3, but those are clearly 3 things we really like doing right now.
Excellent. And I think we've already said this, but the best way for people to kind of influence the future of Premiere Pro is that Premiere Pro beta.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Premiere Pro beta, engage in the beta forums, tell us what you don't like, and hopefully tell us what you do like. And also user voice.
Awesome. All right, so I want to wrap up this conversation right now. We could talk forever on this topic, but I want to get into some nitty gritty stuff. So as we said, Francis, comes from a background as an editor, and we are, for the community spotlight today, going to ask Francis to put that editor hat back on and open up a recent project, show us some things. We want to get into the best practices for using those new workflows, and so that everybody's has all the information that they can be using for maximum efficiency in workflow, and maybe point out some of the cooler things that sometimes go unnoticed. And then after Francis does this demo, we are going to come back for some Q&A, so please do add those to the chat pod. Yeah, Francis, take it away.
Cool, let's do this thing. Let me share my screen. And hold on, sharing screen button is over here. Yes, I know how computers work. Okay, so you should be seeing Premiere Pro. Let me put this over to the side. Okay, so you should be seeing my desktop and Premiere Pro. This is just the home screen. This should look pretty familiar to you all. I'm going to go ahead and grab my memory card from my Atomos Ninja 5 recorder. So this is my setup here that I shoot a lot of stuff with. This is a Panasonic S5 and a Ninja V monitor recorder, SSD drive with footage on it. I'm going to plug this in. And if we go back over to my desktop, you should see it pop up on the desktop here. Here it is. And you guys are all familiar with this. You've got a bunch of files and you can, go through them and look at them. But what I'm going to show you is how you can use import mode to inspect these files and just bring in the ones you want. So I'm going to create a new project, and here we go. On the left-hand side, it already found my Ninja V recorder because I had, looked at this before. And this is a very visual interface. So this was from a trip to New York. I was there for work, but when I wasn't working, you bet I was out with my camera filming stuff. And so I got some really interesting stuff of these guys playing chess in Bryant Park. And so let me select these. Actually, I think I just need a couple of them. Maybe just this one. No, I want this one. Yeah, this one, and then maybe one sort of establishing shot. This is like the trees and people walking through. That's nice. And so you can immediately see the benefits of using import mode to inspect your footage is that it's a very visual process. Now, yes, I could definitely just copy over the entire card and then put these into Premiere and review them as you would expect. But in this particular case, I was shooting for a couple of days. And so I've got, 214 clips. The honest truth is I'm probably not going to use all of those. And I'm also going to have a couple of different projects going. So this one project I'm going to do, we're going to call this Bryant Park. And so let me name my project. And over here on the right-hand side, I'm going to choose a couple of settings. So I'm going to choose to copy the media, and I'm going to have this go to a specific location, which is my external hard drive, New York City. I'll put it in my footage folder. You guys can all admire my nice, tidy folder structure here. Very lovely. And I'm going to put it into a new bin called Bryant Park and a sequence as well called Bryant Park. And I hope I spelled it right for all the New York natives. So I've got everything set up and I'm going to hit create. And what this did was it created a project. It put everything into the bin. It put everything onto a sequence. But then also in the background, you'll notice that Media Encoder is copying these files over from the SSD drive. And this will happen in the background. And what's really great is that I can actually get started editing while those things copy. And because the SSD drive from my Atomos is so fast, it's really very performance. So I guess the first thing I want to do, this isn't going to be a color tutorial, but this is log footage. So let me just put on the vlog to Rec 709 LUT. That looks nice. And then I can start editing. So again, not an editing tutorial, but I'll just make some like really quick edits just to get the point across. And okay, so here's my sequence. Mind you, the footage is still copying in the background. So this is already a performance improvement because I'm already halfway through my edit and I didn't have to wait for that footage to come in. And in fact, I can even export this. So I'm going to go over to export mode now, and I'm going to show you what I like to do to set up export mode for maximum power and flexibility. And so the very first thing is to kind of understand the way things are laid out. So we've got destinations on the left, and this is really set up around where is your media going. And a media file just means that you're going to export something to disk, whereas these other ones have the opportunity to upload to these platforms. In this particular case, I don't need to upload to a platform. I'm just going to make a file on disk. And so now I want to think about, what setting do I want to use? And for the presets here, there's just a few default presets. And these are, we chose these because they're a good cross-section of the formats that people need. But you'll notice that there are some things missing. So you might be thinking, well, okay, this is great if you are just completely in love with H.264, but what about ProRes or DNX HD or any of the others? Or what about HEVC? What about H.265? So the way that we can add those is I'm going to go to more presets. I can do it from here. There's also another way to do it, which is through this little overflow menu here, and more presets is here as well. And this also opens up the preset manager. And this is a really great way to search all the presets that are installed on the system. I don't have any custom ones, but if you had custom ones, you could see just your custom presets or just the ones that are installed by Adobe or all. And so what I'm actually going to do is sort by favorites only by clicking this star. And I want to get rid of some of these default ones that Adobe installed because I actually don't need them. So I'm just unclicking them. Okay, I'm going to leave the match source high bitrate H.264 because I want that. And then I also want to add, let me uncheck the star so I can see what I'm doing here. I also want to add ProRes because that's a common format that I export to all the time. So I'm going to find the ProRes 422HQ QuickTime. And you can see we get a little preview of what we've got going on there. I'm going to add that. And I'm also going to add an HEVC because I've started exporting more and more with HEVC instead of H.264 because it's a more efficient codec. So let's add that. So now what you'll see is we've got these three presets. And in fact, you know what? I'm just going to go for broke on HEVC and get rid of that H.264. Okay, so these are my two presets that I plan to use all the time. And now what you'll notice is just these two presets are in my dropdown. And what I like about that is not having to worry about making the right choice. I only have two options, so I have a pretty good chance of making the right choice and not making any mistakes. So that's the first thing. So let me go ahead and export this. And I'm going to call this, 01. And let me put this in my exports folder. It already went there. That's cool. And let's just go ahead and export this. So this is going to export, and it's going to use Premiere Pro to do it. So this is just the way that you're used to working from before. It actually is going to tie up Premiere while it's processing. But if you wanted to, you could in fact send it over to Media Encoder and let Media Encoder do it in the background, and then you can get back to work. Another benefit of going over to Media Encoder is you can get the old interface that you're used to using. So if this new destination-based approach in Premiere is not for you, that's okay. What I would recommend is to use Media Encoder. And so now you'll see that, let me, if I add like a new preset here, like this Adobe stock one or something, you'll notice that this is going to look very much the same as what you're used to. So that is one tip. Back over in Premiere, it looks to me like that file is done exporting. But here's what always happens. What always happens is you export a file and then you want to make some changes to your edit. So let me make some changes to my edit. Actually, let me make some like big changes, make this really short. And then I'm going to need to export it again. And this is just a very common thing that you do as a video editor. So a bug that we fixed was, and this was that export thing that I was talking about earlier, is what I want to do is click on the destination and find that previous export, click on it to fill in the name, and then just change this to O2. You could imagine if this was a very long file name that I spent a lot of time working on and it has to be correct. You don't want to have to type that out again and again. This is a nice fix. And actually, let me just pause here for a moment and talk about that fix, because this was a big deal on user voice. This really quickly became the #1 complaint on user voice. And we absolutely took that to heart. We realized this was an oversight on our part. We made a mistake. We shouldn't have designed it that way. And so really quickly, we prioritized this as high as we could. We got this fix out. And so I was able to update the community that, you know, the fix is out in version 22.5, and you can go download it to get that fix. So this is a case where, yes, people were angry and they had every right to be angry. And then we fixed it. And so we can move on from that. But back in Premiere, I want to show you some other powerful things about export mode that you should know about. So what often happens is you have to make different renditions of a project. So I'm going to show you how to set up multiple export destinations with different presets and show you why this is really cool. So using the little 3 dots here, I'm going to hit duplicate and duplicate that media file destination. I no longer need this one, so I'm going to turn that off. This one, I'm going to turn that on. And this is going to be my HEVC export. And I'm going to rename this HEVC HQ. But I also want to get a ProRes version out as well, just for my own archives. I always export the highest quality for, just to save on disk in case I need to resurrect this project again. Oops, didn't need to do that. And let me rename this one to ProRes Archival. And let's change this to ProRes. And you'll notice that since I put the time in to customize my presets before, I didn't have to think too hard about making that switch because I just had those two in there. Okay, so now you can set up your exports. We'll call this HEVC and set up my export here. Again, we're going to call this ProRes. And now I'm set up to export these two different versions at the same time. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And while that's processing, we can just talk about, sometimes when we introduce new features that are a big muscle memory change, the initial impression can be quite shocking. But what I would urge you is when you have the time, try to carve out a little bit of time to spend some time with it and really dig in and find those little things that are in fact going to make your workflow faster. And so for me, these are some of the things that really make my workflow faster. In import mode, using the copy function so that I can get those files in very quickly. And then in export mode, setting up those default destinations, those multiple destinations, so that I can get the files exported very quickly. And what's also really nice about, having those destinations set up, those multiple destinations set up, is that if I then need to make changes to this project and I'm like, oh my God, I already exported all my renditions. And, I'm just doing 2 as an example, but you could have 4 or 6 or 8 different renditions of a project that you need to get out. And if you need to make a quick change to the edit, getting all those renditions out again is actually so much faster because you already have those destinations set up. So yeah, I think these are some of my tips and tricks. Let's go to Q&A. What do you think, Nakiesha?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a few. I just want to say thank you so much, Francis. It's really helpful to have this kind of additional context for how best to use new features. We hope that they are intuitive, but sometimes, especially when there's changes to the way you work, that you need to kind of develop those new muscles in the best, most efficient way possible. So thanks for showing us that. We have a question from Mark H on YouTube. It says, I find that when I'm importing and having to go down into files of content, when I click into the subfiles, it selects the entire file and I have to unselect items that I don't want. Is that a default option that can be turned off to only select what I choose? The parsing latency of going into subfiles and it selecting every day is my only gripe, but also sends a bunch of love towards Premiere and After Effects. Mark, thanks for the question. And it is a great question.
Yeah, so it's not a default behavior. I think what you're running into is possibly you're clicking on the folder in the upper left-hand corner of the folder, which is where the checkbox selection is. So what you want to do is just double click in the middle of the folder and it should just open the folder instead of selecting the whole folder, which then also selects everything in the folder. So that's a good example of really little things that we could probably do to improve. So maybe adjusting the tolerance of double clicking or the tolerance of like where you click to get that checkbox in a folder. Yeah, we could probably improve that. But you're not doing anything wrong.
And if you have specific ways that you would like to see it improved, like if you want us to change the tolerance on that double click, or maybe make it so that selecting the folder itself just like selects the folder, whereas like clicking the checkbox adds it to the selection tray, like please list those out in a user voice comment so that we can think through the different approaches that would make the most sense to you.
And I dropped the link for Premiere Pro's user voice into the chat pod, as well as the community forums where there's more like community conversations happening about things and tutorials if you're running into questions. So those are in the chat pods for both YouTube and Facebook right now. Some of the other comments that we've been seeing on social are there's some curiosity around this idea of like full screen in export window, and I think again, is that a feature, or is there any way to kind of alter that? Is that something either of you would be able to speak to?
Yeah, I think we tried really hard for a clean interface, and using the full screen was the way to do that. The thing that we now need to kind of reconcile is the fact that some folks are working on enormous monitors. Like if you have a 49-inch ultra wide monitor, there can be some real distance between, the buttons. You select something and then you want to move all the way down to hit import. So yeah, that is something that we actually need to find a solution to and improve.
And are actively working on as well. Another question that we have seen a fair amount of is, why can't you just give me the option to not use the new thing? So I know some of the reasons, but I think, yeah, you probably both have some kind of side-by-side insights. But Parker, let's start with you. When you're designing, are you designing with the option to never mind to use the old way, or are you trying to only design for the future?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough thing because like I mentioned before, we want to try to preserve old workflows that people feel comfortable with where we can and where it makes sense. But at the same time, we have to look towards the future, and sometimes we have to take a leap to move towards the future. I mean, Premiere Pro is over 25 years old at this point. It's an app that is never finished. And so these experiences that you see, they are not the end state. We're going to continue to improve them. But I think from our perspective, we want to make sure every experience gets to a point where we're going to commit to that new experience rather than try to maintain this old way of working and this new way of working equally, because at that point we're sort of like fracturing our attention and our resources across two completely different experiences rather than doing what we can to make the new thing the best possible thing. So like, I won't say that like we're always going to like jump towards the new thing immediately and tell you you can't do the old. But our goal is definitely to improve new experiences rather than try to maintain both new and old experiences. I don't know if that you agree with that, Francis, or you have your own thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that forward is the way ahead. You know, we have to keep on moving forward. And we keep on hearing that we need to modernize Premiere. And this is what we're doing. And it's going to be painful for some folks along the way. We want to try to minimize that. But we do have to move forward. And, you know, to what Parker said, it actually is, it's a nightmare to maintain two different workflows. So, you know, imagine if we did have the old export workflow as well. We'd have to have both in our documentation. We'd have to have both in our, you know, learn tutorials. And then whenever a customer, you know, called support for help, they'd have to ask, well, you know, which one do you use? I don't know. I just clicked the thing. So it does become a lot more trouble than it's worth to try to keep to keep a bifurcated workflow. And so we really try to avoid that.
And not to bring up a sticky topic, but Ben, I think on Facebook, Ben brought up or observed that legacy titler, we've been in that mode for a while. And that's, it is a great example of having two workflows for a very long time, and then it becomes really difficult to get rid of one at some point.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that the legacy titler is built on ancient code, like really old code, and it contributes a lot to our instability. So like one of the most important things for us right now is just making a stable app. And sometimes that means making some hard choices about prioritizing out with the old, in with the new. Legacy titler is a good example of that, actually.
All right, we need to wrap it up, but I do think that this is like, there's so many things. I'm going to end with one last question from Ben on the Facebook stream, who asks, how closely are you working with social media companies? I know the safe zones are set up for old broadcast style media, but they don't necessarily help to compose for vertical video, Instagram, TikTok, etc. I think this is a great, when we're looking at the future, where we are now and the future, and how, as we said at the beginning, the industry is constantly changing and sometimes very quickly.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm glad you brought up vertical video, because we actually introduced a vertical video workspace in the latest release. So go up to that workspace switcher, find vertical, and you'll see an alignment for that. But beyond that, I'm actually working on a project related to vertical video safe margin zones as we speak. Several times a year, well, maybe not, maybe like 2 times a year, we do this thing called Innovation Week, where basically the engineers and product team are basically set loose. And we say, hey, you can work on whatever you want. It doesn't have to be something that's on your sort of like assigned list. And the thing that I picked up this year is exactly what you're talking about. I'm actually on like TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and figuring out like where all that UI shows up and making overlays. So I'm glad you mentioned that because it's really on my mind right now.
I love it. Parker, do you want to leave us with something that's really on your mind lately?
I mean, I would say that vertical video is also very on my mind, which is funny because in the year before I joined here at Adobe, I actually wrote a scathing paper in film school about how vertical video is unnatural and should not be part of the cinematic language. And then one of the very first projects that I worked on here was auto reframe to reframe horizontal video primarily to vertical. And now I think that that's something that we're trying to take really seriously. Like our application was primarily developed for sort of like broadcast or horizontal video standards. And with the introduction of this new workspace for vertical video, potentially new guides for video, auto reframe, and the ability now in export mode to set up different destinations, we could look at having destinations that bring you directly to some of those vertical video providers. So I think that it's really fun trying to like take this application that has like a classic legacy in sort of like TV broadcasting or cinema and make it work for the type of video that most of us have to use in some capacity these days, and some of us use exclusively. So that's a really fun challenge for us to do right now.
Excellent. I've also seen vertical showing up in weird ways in broadcast. So it's not only, there's, anyways. We can't talk about everything
Alexas
forever.
on set that actually have like vertical guides on them now. It's amazing.
Or they turn them sideways.
Okay, we have gone over time today. I want to thank everybody who joined us live. There was great engagement in the chat pods and wonderful questions from all of you. I really appreciate you being here and adding to our conversation. I want to thank you, Francis and Parker, for your time today and for coming with. I think we covered a lot of ground here, so I really appreciate you talking a lot about your process, your experience, and what you want to take into the future. And yeah, we'll see you. We'll be back here on July 26th. Anyways, it's the last Wednesday of every month where we do these. So stay tuned for more and have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
Take
y'all.
care, everyone.